Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This week, my guest is Stephen Weisberg, and he is the founder and lead attorney at the W Tax Group. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate you having me on.
So what got you, give us your background to get us, to where you are now, and then we'll go more into why.
Sure. So I'm an attorney. I was a corporate bankruptcy attorney for the first 5 or 6 years of my career. I decided I wanted to take a different path. I wanted to, really speak to the people and really have a relationship where I could see how I was helping others. And while it still may be in a corporate setting, it's more with, small business owners, sole proprietors, people who are self-employed. And what I do now is I am a tax debt expert. I help entrepreneurs, like I said, sole props, small businesses with tax debt issues. I help them resolve it with the IRS, protect their assets, protect their bank accounts, protect everything they have, but also making sure that they get the best deal possible, because you've got an IRS that is literally the most powerful collection agency in the world, and they have a ton of leverage on anyone else.
Right. What is it about, understanding, that you like helping people and helping business owners and stuff, but what was it about the tax debt that made you start this up?
Well, again, I'll kind of go back to how I started, and it was in corporate bankruptcy, and I'm located here in Detroit, or just outside of Detroit, Michigan. So obviously the auto companies are a big employer here and a big part of our economy in general. So when I was doing corporate bankruptcy, we would represent suppliers who were bankrupt, but big, large companies. And, every time a supplier went into bankruptcy, there's only a certain amount of money that goes to the creditors.
Right.
And at the end of the day, Ford, GM, Chrysler would always get paid back in full. They get all their money back. And then there were small suppliers, small business owners, kind of the fabric of the community, who would get maybe 2 cents on the dollar. And so at the end of the day, I was like, well, I'm glad the car companies are doing well to whatever extent they are, because that's kind of the lifeblood of this community. But I didn't really want to be there just so I can make sure they get paid back in full.
Right.
So I decided I wanted to go on a different path. I want to deal with, and work with the small business owners, the sole proprietors, and just those people who are out there working day to day, making a good, honest living, and just trying to make it through, try to do the best they can, but don't have the power of the automakers. So I tried to figure out where that fit in, and I was already in an industry, where financial distress was what I was working with. So actually, I kind of went a different route, and I knew I wanted to deal with the small business owners, but I didn't know necessarily how. And I ultimately got a job with a tax debt resolution attorney in the area. I didn't necessarily know what I was doing, but I got great experience there. A guy who really knew what he was doing. I did well. I learned a lot, and then ultimately went off on my own, so that I could help people by myself.
So help us dispel a myth. We hear all of these advertisements and everything else that talk about that they can settle your tax debt for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And that's a smart idea to bring that up right off the bat, because that's the main, if I said nothing else in this podcast, that was the one thing that I would want to talk about, because like you said, on the radio, even on TV, everywhere. There's these companies, these large kind of national companies, these 800-pound gorillas, I call them in the industry, and they say we can settle your tax debt for 10 cents on the dollar, for 10%, for 20%, whatever it is. So a couple things. They're lying is the real quick answer. It's not that they're lying that this can't happen. It can happen, but they don't know anything about your case or anyone's case specifically. So there's no way for them to know whether they can help you with your case. It's not as if just everyone qualifies for what's called an offer in compromise, where you can settle for 10% of what you owe. You can do that. It is possible. But most people don't qualify. And certainly a company that has a radio ad out there who doesn't know anything about your case specifically isn't going to be able to tell you whether you qualify or not. Someone has to look at your case, go through it specifically line by line, look at your finances, look at what taxes owed, look at the specifics, and then determine whether you're an offer in compromise candidate. And so, like I said, it is possible, but the reality is most people don't qualify for something like that.
So, besides reaching out to you, if somebody has tax debt and they hear these different companies or whoever talking about that they can help them settle their debt for lower than what it is, what are some of the questions that they should be asking to make sure that they're protecting themselves? Because I've heard the horror stories of people giving thousands and thousands of dollars to these people and nothing ever getting settled.
Exactly. The reality is, if you're hearing a national radio ad on the car radio, I wouldn't suggest you go to any of those people. They're huge. They may have some attorneys working for them. They may not. They may have, they might have salespeople that are speaking to you who don't really know kind of what they're talking about, but they kind of speak as if they know what they're talking about. The first thing I would do is find someone a referral, if you can get a referral. And now, not everyone might be able to do that, but I would find someone in your community, or at least someone, because I work nationwide as well, at least someone who you can get on the phone with, an attorney. You'll probably speak to someone ahead of time who might not be an attorney, but they're going to then refer you to the attorney. And you'll speak with the attorney. And you also, like I said, you want to make sure that they're looking at your case specifically. Because what happens a lot of times, like you said, is, these big companies will say, okay, great. I got you on the phone. I see you owe $100,000. Well, we can definitely settle that for 10% of what you owe. And again, they don't know anything about your case. So it's impossible for them to know what you owe and how what owe specifically, and then also how they can resolve it. The way I do business is I usually do an initial investigation so that everyone's on the same page. I find out how much you owe, what are the penalties, what's the interest, what years, whether you're in compliance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I come back to it and say, look, this is what I found out. I've looked at your financials. This is what I see. And here's what I think I can do for you. And at that point, we're all on the same page. The client and myself are on the same page. We both know what's possible moving forward. And then we go from there, as opposed to me saying, hey, like these big companies, hey, give me $10,000, I'll fix your problem for 10 cents on the dollar. And then, they file these offering compromises and they don't get accepted. And then they say, oh, sorry, I tried, but it didn't work. And then you're out $10,000 plus you still have your tax debt.
Right. I mean, and that's more along the lines of the stories that I've heard from people. So how does your approach to this differ than what we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to my comments, from the previous question, which is really, I do an initial investigation. I look at what years have been filed, what years still need to be filed. I find out how much you owe, what the penalties are, what the interest is. I look at your financials. Bottom line is I look at everything and I decide here, based on everything I know about you specifically and what I know about what you owe, and I know about what I understand about the IRS, I know where we can go from here. So I'm not just making it up as I go and say, yeah, I can help you. Just hand over money and we'll figure it out as we go along. I'm going to tell you exactly what we can do for you. And then you can decide, with my guidance, whether or not you want to move forward and whether it makes sense for you. Also, there are times when maybe I look into it and I say, look, it makes more sense that you just do this on your own. I think that is something you can handle on your own. I'm not trying to take people's money who I can't do anything for. And unless I
Sure.
go through the analysis, I don't know that. And so these companies, they have no idea. They're just telling you to hand over your money and we'll figure it out. And then it doesn't get figured out and you're kind of, left hanging with the debt.
So, you say that you give a free tax debt analysis. What is that?
Well, I guess that's exactly what we were talking about.
Okay.
It's the analysis of what is owed, penalties, interest, whether or not you're in compliance, whether you filed everything. I look at your financials, I look at everything, and then I make a determination about what I would advise you to do moving forward and what I can do for you based on, the totality of the circumstances.
So then you aren't charging a fee until you get to that point.
Well, so I charge an upfront fee for the tax debt analysis, but that fee goes towards the resolution that I provide to you. So, ultimately, it turns out to be a wash. The analysis can be anywhere from $500 to $2,500. Usually starts at 500. But if the resolution that I provide to you is X amount of money, that $500 is going to go towards the
Gotcha.
resolution fee.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know because that's a important distinction. Because again, where I've seen it, it's like, you're giving them a large sum of money up front. And they say, well, that's part of our cost of having to do all of this and so forth. So
Exactly.
what are you seeing? What are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing individuals and business owners make when it comes to tax debt?
I think the first thing, honestly, is they try to go at it on their own. So on one hand, I'm saying, look, there's a lot of people out there that are kind of swindlers, and it's true. On the other hand, you really need help. You need to get someone who's an expert in this realm that can help you because, like I said earlier, the IRS is literally the most powerful collection agency on the planet. They have so much power. I mean, people don't even know, and it's not their job or in their best interest to kind of tell you, hey, this is what you can do, and here's what rights you have, and this is how you can resolve it the best way for you. They're trying to get as much money as possible from you and as quickly as possible. So when you have an attorney or CPA representing you, you have someone that can, vouch for you, that can protect your rights and make sure that you're being taken care of properly and you're not being taken advantage of because the IRS has that much power.
Right, right. Have you, what I've seen lots of times is people get these notices and they're like, oh, it's wrong. And they're expecting the IRS to be able to straighten it out on their own.
Yeah.
How do you, help people understand that no, that there needs to be some interaction here. You can't just, just wait.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing is the IRS has no interest in helping you. That's the reality. I mean, it may be the cold hard truth, but that is the reality. Like they're trying to bring in as much money as possible. That's what they're there for. They're there to collect from you. So they're not, they're going to do what they're supposed to do generally, but if they make a mistake, they're not going to necessarily correct that mistake. You need someone to intervene on your behalf. It's not going to happen on its own. These debts aren't going to go away. I have a lot of clients come to me at the 11th hour where they've been getting notices and they've kind of stuck their head in the sand and said, I hope this goes away. And while I do understand where that comes from, because
Right.
you owe money, you're uncomfortable, you don't want to deal with it. The big bad IRS is after you, and you're just like, I can't handle this. It's just too much anxiety. I don't know what to do, where to go. But it's not going anywhere. The IRS is not going to stop coming after you. They're not going to kind of, put it on the shelf and wait for it, to disappear. It's never going to disappear. The later that you intervene or get someone else on your behalf, the more problems you have and the less leverage you have. Because as I said, the IRS has all the leverage. The earlier that you start working out a resolution in the process, the more leverage that you have to get yourself the most favorable result.
Right. What would you say to somebody who, isn't filing a tax return because they say they don't have the money to pay the taxes?
Yeah, and that's a good question. The main thing is file the tax return in simplest terms. The reason is a couple-fold. One, there are failure to file penalties, which can be up to 25% of what you owe on the return. There's failure to pay penalties, which can be another 25% of what you owe on the return. So you could be paying up to 50% more than you owe on the return. If you get the return on file, then you've cut off the failure to file penalties. So you're saving 25% of what you owe right there. And if you're able to file and then even make some payment towards the amount that you owe, that's better than nothing, because then you've defrayed the penalties that could come to you based on how much you owe, because you at least made a payment. And then you can resolve the issue, however it may be. You can get into a payment plan. You can get into some resolution where you're taking care of the debt, because, and this is very important, if you don't file the return, the IRS will then file the return for you. And when the IRS files it for you, they're not going to take into account the deductions, any credits that you should be entitled to. They're going to just get rid of that and just put it on file. So let's say you're a small business owner and you have certainly a lot of debt, most business owners do, expenses and the like. That's not going to be taken into account by the IRS. They're just going to put down, hey, we think you made whatever $100,000 and you have no expenses to defray how much you owe, when really your expenses may have been $90,000, whatever it may be. So they're going to make it look like you owe $100,000 when you may have had extensive expenses that you need to take into account. And so if you don't file the return, the IRS will file it for you. It's called a substitute for return.
What about somebody negotiating a payment plan?
Yep. So payment plans are certainly something that's available. The IRS calls them installment agreements. But, it's not as simple as it might seem. There are multiple types of payment plans. There are payment plans that make sense under certain circumstances. There's payment plans that make sense under other circumstances. So in order for you to get the most favorable payment plan, you need, again, someone to represent you on your behalf to make sure you get that. Because, sometimes they'll give you a payment plan for 6 years. And that's all great. But if you were entitled to a payment plan where you only had to pay, half of what you're paying under the 6-year plan, well, then you're missing out, because you'd be paying much less on a monthly basis. And one of the areas where I've had the best resolutions are with what's called a partial pay installment agreement. And that's an installment agreement you're not going to really know about. You're not going to know whether you qualify for it, and you may be paying much more than you need to pay on a monthly basis. The partial pay installment agreement is, in effect, where you're paying the IRS on a monthly basis, but you may never, and the idea of the partial pay installment agreement is that you, theoretically, under the installment agreement, you would never pay off the total amount of your debt. The IRS has 10 years to collect from you. So, let's say, again, I just keep using $100,000 because it's a round number, but let's say you make a $100 payment every month to the IRS, and let's say there's 9 years left on what I said was the statute of limitations. So the IRS only has 9 years left to collect from you. If you're paying $100 a month for 9 years, you're never going to pay off $100,000, right? You're going to be paying much less than that. But when it hits that 10-year statute of limitations, even if, let's just say you've paid $10,000 over the 10 years, you owed $100,000. Well, at that statute of limitations, the $100,000 is going to drop off. You're not going to owe it anymore. The IRS can't collect it from you anymore. Any liens you had are going to go away. It's gone. Even though you only may have paid $10,000. The 100,000 is gone. So those are the type of things that you need to understand that are potential compromises for you that you can get with the IRS. And if you go in there blindly and just say, I need a payment plan, they'll give you one, but you have no idea if it made sense for you or if it's the
Right.
best.
Now you talk about the statute of limitations. Is that based on when you filed the return or when the due date was?
The 10-year statute of limitation is when you file the return. So even if 2024, you were supposed to file in April of 25, if you don't file that until April of 26, it starts from whenever you file it and whenever the tax is assessed. So, and I say that, it's whenever you file the return, but alternatively, like if the IRS files a return on your behalf, the substitute for return, it's whenever that tax gets assessed. So if it gets a $100,000 tax that is assessed from a substitute for return, well, then that's when the 10 years start. If the tax gets assessed after you file a return, that's when the 10 years starts, but it's not based on the due date.
So, we just covered like probably a nano bit of all of this, and you can already see how complicated it is. And if you're not using the right rules and stuff like that, that you could be seriously overpaying, or think you're in a better position than you are.
Exactly. And not only that, if you can't pay whatever their installment agreement is that they're giving you, you don't need to pay it. So some people go in there, they call the IRS, and the IRS says, here, we'll give you 6 years to pay this thing off. And it's, whatever, $1,000 a month. People say, well, I have to. I don't have any other choice. I've got to, I don't want the IRS coming and taking money out of my bank account or whatever it is. And they just go with it. And then they ultimately default because they were never able to pay that $1,000 a month. You need to go in, you need to have someone negotiate on your behalf to make sure that you're paying on a monthly basis something that you can actually afford.
Right. Stephen, give us a success story where you've helped somebody.
Well, I kind of laugh at this question because there are so many people that I've helped and so many stories that like I don't know where to start. And so there's a couple of things that go back to what we talked about with the offering compromise.
Right.
If people want to hear an offering compromise story, I've settled on $1 million debt for $500. So
wow.
I know people like that story. It's great and it sounds great, and I love telling it, but you're probably not qualified for that. But it did happen. It actually happened. So, when people ask that, like that's the first thing that comes to mind. But there are so many people that I've helped over the years, whether it be to get them into a resolution so that the IRS isn't going to levy their bank account or garnish their wages, whether it's getting a levy or a garnishment released, whether it's getting them into a partial pay installment agreement with that, which I talked about before, where you're paying something each month and you'll never pay off the debt. I mean, I can resolve every person's, debt. There's no doubt about it. There's never a time where I say, sorry, just couldn't help you. There's nothing I can do. I can resolve any person's debt. It depends on the circumstances about what the outcome is. Sometimes the outcome ultimately is you have to pay the IRS on a monthly basis for 6 years. That might be the outcome. But I can always resolve the underlying balance, and I can make sure that you're going to get the most favorable result that makes sense for you.
Gotcha. What we haven't even, and you represent people in audit also.
I do, yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, because again, many people think, oh, I got a letter, I'm being audited. Not necessarily, but audits do happen.
Right. And audits do happen. And there are certainly audits where, that auditor still wants to come out to your business and still wants to look through your files and all of that stuff. But a lot of the audits are called correspondence audits. And yes, you do get a letter that says, hey, you owe this amount. Now, not all the correspondence that goes out are audits, but there are those still that happen. again, the idea is they're going to send you out a letter and tells you what you owe. And maybe they say, your returns said you owed X amount of money, but we think you owe Y amount of money. Again, the point is they're going to do what they need to do to collect money. They're not going to, cross every T and dot every I to make sure that they're getting, their number for what you owe is exactly what you owe to make sure you get the benefit of the doubt. They're not going to do that. So, when you get an audit letter, correspondence audit letter, you need to make sure that someone takes a look at that and determines whether or not what they're saying is real, or whether it's something that they got wrong, just because they didn't look into the specifics of it. So you definitely want someone to represent you when it comes to that. You need someone to look at exactly how the IRS came up with that number, and what you can do to reduce that number and get it to the right number.
Right. So, Steve, we covered a lot of stuff. I could go on forever with this because this is such a big topic that a lot of times that people don't take seriously, unfortunately.
Right.
What have I not asked you that you wish I had?
Well, initially I was going to say not everyone qualifies for the offer in compromise, because like I said, that's the main thing that
Right.
I wanted to get across here. The main thing that I would say is, do not put your head in the sand. Do not pretend like this is going away. It's not going away. I just want people to know, get representation. You're going to pay for representation, but the benefit to you is far outweighs whatever you're paying. The IRS is out there to collect money. That's their whole, what they're there for is to collect money. You need representation, and you need to go at it quickly rather than later. If you come to me with, which happens all the time, with my bank account's been levied, well, my leverage is much less than. You need to go after this right away. So when you see that notice, try to reach out to representation sooner rather than later. As painful as it may seem, you got to do it sooner rather than later, because you're going to have to deal with it. And the longer you wait, the more penalties you have, the less leverage you have, and the less opportunity you have to get a favorable result.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, that Steven's an attorney that does this, and this is all he does. He's not a jack of all trades where he's trying to do 8 million other things plus chasing ambulances, stuff like that. No, by the way, I also help settle IRS debt. So, as I always say on the show, there are specialists that do certain things. And lots of times, your traditional tax preparer who is recording history isn't well versed in helping deal with notices from the IRS or from state agencies. So when you do get one of these, if you have someone who is not well versed in this, please reach out to Stephen or someone like Stephen that does this, and this is what they do, and not one of those big guys that you hear on the radio.
Well, that's exactly right. And to be honest, I get referrals, a lot of referrals from tax preparers and accountants, because they don't know how to do this, and they
Right.
have clients that owe money and they don't know what to do, and it's not their expertise. So you're right. This is what I focus on. We do some tax preparation, certainly, but our focus and our expertise is in tax debt resolution. It's not in bankruptcy. It's not in anything else. All I do on a daily basis, day to day, is deal with the IRS and resolve tax debt.
Great. So, Stephen, if people like what they hear and they want to reach out to you and talk to you, how can they reach you?
So you can actually reach me directly. I'll give you my number. It's 248-971-0885. That's 248-971-0885. You can also go to our website, the company's website, which is wtaxattorney.com. And you can reach to me by email. It's weisberg@wtaxattorney.com. I'm sure the spelling is in the liner notes, but it's SWEISBERG@wtaxattorney.com. But probably what's best is to take my telephone number down. You can text me, you can call me, whatever makes the most sense for you, but that's a direct line to me, myself.
Great. And like Stephen said earlier, they do work nationwide. It's not, just in his local area. So certainly if you have any issues, reach out to him. And Stephen, I really appreciate your time in our talk today.
Sure. And I appreciate you having me on. We covered a lot, and you're right. There's so much more to cover. I could talk all day about this, but I think we hit some really good points and some important points. So I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. Hey, this week, our guest was Stephen Weisberg, and he is the founder and lead attorney of the W Tax Group. And I'll see you guys next week.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.